This is why you should always check under your bed for monsters. In 2012, a young woman who was on the phone with her boyfriend walks downstairs to the lobby of her apartment building, collects her mailing, and then heads back up to her room. She sits on her bed to start sifting through the mail when she drops her phone and it falls under the bed. She lies down on the ground to try to reach her arm out to grab her phone when she notices something horrible underneath her bed. A man is lying underneath her bed with his back to her. He's in the fetal position. She manages not to scream. She grabs her phone and says to her boyfriend, "Hey, I gotta go shower. I'll call you back," and she quickly runs into the bathroom, locks the door, turns on the shower, and then jumps out her first floor window. Once she's safely across the street, she calls the police who quickly arrive. And they go inside and they come out with a deranged, skinny-looking man. Before they take him away, one of the officers walks over to her with a very grim look on his face. He looks at her and he just says, "We found him standing outside of your bathroom holding a knife. He was waiting for you." This is why you should never open your door for strangers. In 2013, a woman let her dog out to use the bathroom one more time before bed. After only a few minutes, she starts hearing scratching on her door, which is typically the sound her dog makes when he's ready to come in. It just seemed way too soon for him to be done being outside, so she decides to look through the peephole to make sure it really is her doggo. But what she sees is terrifying. A deranged-looking man is right outside her door, staring intently at her door handle, waiting for it to turn open. As she's looking in horror, unable to do anything, he starts scratching at the door as hard as he can, never leaving his gaze from the door handle. She manages to stifle a scream. She backs away and realizes her dog is still outside, so she goes to the side window, but there's no sign of her dog, until she goes back to the door to see if maybe the man's moved. He hasn't moved. His mouth is open and he's staring directly at the peephole. Then he turns around and walks away. With the man gone, she discovers her dog unharmed. His leash had just been caught, but that means he had a knife. This girl literally lived a nightmare. A 17-year-old girl was watching TV late at night when her motion detector lights in her driveway suddenly went on. She assumed it was just an animal, so she got up, drew the blinds, and went back to watching TV. Then, a little bit later, it happened again, before she could even react. She looks over and clearly makes out a silhouette of a person right behind the blinds who starts banging aggressively on the window. The girl stands up and goes, "I'm gonna call the cops," and the figure stops for just a second, sprints to the side door, and starts pounding even louder on that, screaming incoherently. The girl runs to the bathroom, barricades herself inside while she waits for the police. And then her worst nightmares come true. She hears glass shatter in the other room. After a few minutes of silence, she opens her or just a crack to get a peek outside. And standing in her living room next to a broken window is some crazy old woman who looks over at her and starts sprinting toward her. The lady comes smashing into the door and starts wailing on it until the police arrive and take her away. She was a lunatic who had escaped her facility. If you ever find yourself in this situation, don't do what she did. In 2006, a group of cave divers decided they wanted to film a documentary in one of the most dangerous caves in the world. But only a few hours into their descent, and a freak storm erupts on land, collapsing the entrance to the cave. In order to avoid the huge falling rocks that were coming off the ceiling, they were forced to swim through one of the uncharted sections of the cave. After they've been diving for over an hour, they luckily come across this island in the middle of a tunnel, where they set up camp and wait to be rescued. After 48 hours and no sign of a rescue, the cameraman actually starts filming in case they don't make it out of there. At the same time, one of their crew members does something very stupid. If you scare easily, I wouldn't watch this video. In 2013, a mine explorer found this entrance to an abandoned mine and decided to go have a look around. He decides to film his experience and upload it to his YouTube channel, where he had uploaded hundreds of other videos of him exploring mines, but he never once references the paranormal or ghosts or anything like that until this video. As soon as he steps foot inside, he tells the camera that he has a really uneasy feeling about being there and wonders if he should even keep going. But he does. Everything seems pretty normal until he gets to a section in the mine where there's a bunch of chains hanging down from the ceiling. He hears something in the back of the tunnel, So he pulls his flashlight out and he shines it towards the back and he sees a chain swinging. And it shouldn't be, cause there's no draft and he's all alone. And you can tell he's scared by the way he starts stalking. Although he's totally freaked out, he wants to know what's causing the chain to swing. So he goes farther and farther into the mine until he hears something. People whispering in every direction. He gets totally spooked and runs out. If you don't want to sleep tonight, watch the whole video. This is why you should always lock your doors. A junior in high school was home alone working on a paper while his parents were out to dinner. All night he sits with his back to his door, sitting at his desk with his noise-canceling headphones on. Around 11:00, he takes his headphones off. At the same time, his parents are returning to the house, and he hears his mom from downstairs yell, "Hey, Adrian." What happened? Confused, he runs downstairs and sees right away what she's looking at, muddy footprints all over the rug. He tells her, "I didn't leave my desk," and then they realize someone must have broken in. They look at the footprints and there's none leaving the house. They're worried someone's still in the house. They run into the garage, terrified, call the police. Police arrived and they don't find anyone in the house, but they do make a chilling discovery upstairs. The police bring them to the kids' bedroom door, which had been left open all night, and they point to the message written on it in Sharpie. This is the actual transcript of what was written on his door, which means for nearly 2 hours. Someone stood in this kid's doorway watching him. I was not ready for the ending to this one. In the early 2000s, seconds to 15-year-old friends were camping in a state forest with their families. One night, the friends decide they want to go explore the woods around their campsite, but they want to see how far they can get without using a flashlight. A little ways into their trip, they start to hear some whispering behind them, and they quickly turn around, pull out their flashlights, and start looking for what was making the sound. After a short search, they don't find anything, and so even though they're a little bit freaked out, they decide to put their flashlights away and carry on into the woods. After a little while, they start to hear the whispering again, so they pull out their flashlights. Now they're determined to find out what the heck is making this sound. They do a very thorough search. They don't find anything. And at this point, they're too freaked out and they decide to start heading back. As they start retracing their steps, they see what was making the sound. A woman comes out from behind a tree crawling towards them, muttering random words. She sees them, stands up, and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking for my campsite. They're half a mile from the nearest campsite. You only have about 13 minutes from the warning to the arrival of a tornado." Keep that in mind as you watch this. In 2017, a woman living in Oklahoma heard the eerie tornado siren going off outside her car and she started filming. Instead of stopping at a nearby shelter, she decides to gun it home, cause she's only 10 minutes away. But by the time she was about to turn onto her street, the sky had turned totally black and she started to panic that she wasn't gonna get home in time. She finally makes it to a parking garage that's now totally pitch black and she starts running for her door, and as she's running, she's filming. Let this be a reminder that there really are monsters out there. In 2007, a woman living right near a prison in California got home late one night and went right to bed. Around midnight, she woke up to footsteps on her first floor, assumed it was her roommate, so she goes downstairs to say hi. She yells out to her roommate who doesn't say anything, and then in walks this giant man who she doesn't recognize. She runs upstairs, jumps in her closet into the crawl space, and hides. As she's helplessly tucked away in this little crawl space, trying not to make any sound, all she hears is this giant man sprinting around her house, running into walls, flipping furniture, and screaming in frustration, cause he can't find her. Finally, after several hours, she slowly opens the crawl space back up, crawls out, and gets her phone off the nightstand and calls police. As she's telling the police her story, she describes the person who had broken in and they stop her and say, "Ma'am, go back in the crawl space and stay there. We'll be there as soon as we can." It turned out a 6'11" convicted murderer had escaped the prison and was still on the loose. This is why you should always look under the toilet seat before you sit down. In 2003, over a 5-day period in London, 3 women showed up to hospitals with the same mysterious symptoms. They say they woke up with these horrible bite marks on the backs of their legs, and then while they're at the hospital, they become paralyzed and die. Despite their similar symptoms, the women had nothing in common except that they had recently been to the same pub. Authorities immediately shut it down and do a thorough search inside of the pub, but can't find anything deadly, until one of the detectives goes to use the pub's bathroom. As he's about to sit down, he thinks he sees something moving in the toilet, so he gives it a little kick. Hiding in the toilet was one of the world's largest and most poisonous spiders, the Brazilian wandering spiders, and now they needed to catch her. I can confirm that this is a true story. In 2004, a 16-year-old boy who was staying with a friend in their cabin up in New Hampshire was having a hard time falling asleep. Around 3:00 a.m. he was still awake, and he remembers thinking how eerily quiet and totally pitch black the house was. And that's when he heard it. The front door opens and someone comes inside and begins walking through the house, down the hallway right outside of his door where it stops. The door opens and the boy is instantly petrified because in walks this tall, shadowy figure that marches to the center of the room and then bows onto the ground and disappears. The boy stays up all night, terrified that this thing's gonna reemerge and just look at him. Finally, he hears his friend's mom making coffee in the kitchen, so he runs out to tell her what happened. The whole time he's explaining what happened, she's just looking at him with sympathy in her eyes, and finally she says, "My husband visited me last night too, was me." Her husband was dead, and I was that 16-year-old boy. This story is why people are scared of the dark. In the early 2000s, a man and his dog were staying in a very isolated cabin in the backcountry of Oregon. One day, he notices some human footprints leading up to and then disappearing away from his cabin, but there aren't any cabins anywhere near his is. But he writes it off. That night, he wakes up to the sound of footsteps on his roof. Feeling brave, he heads to the balcony to take a look. He doesn't see anything on the roof, but his dog sees something out in the forest and he starts growling. The man starts to scan the tree line and then he sees it. A freakishly tall man is squatting on a branch just 20 feet away from his balcony. His arms are outstretched, his mouth is open, no expression on his face. The man in terror backs into his house, grabs his dog, shuts the door, shines the light on the branch, but it's gone now. Feeling freaked out, he shuts all the blinds, makes sure all the doors are locked. He gets in his bed and for the next several hours, he hears tapping on both of the two doors from his friend outside. "Hey guys, I'm back by the fire, and I have another awesome story to share with you." Today's story is this epic survival story. And I mean, the story itself is truly unbelievable, but I'm telling you, that the twist at the end, basically how this person was able to survive, you will not see coming. Great plot twist. Great story. I know you're gonna like it. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right campfire because that's all we do. And we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come join you at your campfire. But when they show up, just immediately push them into the flames and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. Around 10:00 a.m. on March 18th, 1944, a 26-year-old Finnish soldier named Aimo Koivunen sat around a campfire with a group of other soldiers inside of the Arctic Circle in Northern Europe. They were very deep into the wilderness, in this forest that was covered in several feet of snow. And Aimo was melting a pot of that snow over the fire so the group could drink some tea. And at the same time that Aimo was doing this, even though it was kind of relaxing to be sitting here, his whole body was basically aching. Number one, it was, 5 degrees outside, and this was also the first time that he and the other soldiers had stopped to rest in about 2 days. They had been on the move the whole time. So, Aimo and his squadron were all members of the Finnish military, and at this point during World War II, they were actually allied with Nazi Germany. Not because, they were Nazis, they were not, but because Finland and Germany shared a common enemy, the Soviet Union. Right now, Aimo and his squadron were in an area called Lapland, which used to belong to Finland. But for years earlier, the Soviet Union had invaded Finland and ultimately forced Finland to cede this land to the Soviets. But now, during World War II, Finland wanted to get their land back, and Germany was helping them do that. And so Imo and his squadron were in Lapland on essentially a reconnaissance mission. They were there to try to figure out sort of what the Soviets were doing in this part of Lapland and how many Soviets were out there. Again, in this particular part of Lapland, however, Imo and the others had spent the past 2 days skiing all over the place in their area of operations, but so far they hadn't seen any Soviet soldiers or any Soviet bases. But you know, for Imo and probably for the other soldiers that he was with, I mean, this was ultimately a good thing. They weren't trained for combat, but they didn't necessarily want to come across Soviets and have, like a full-blown shootout, in part because the Soviets were just a bigger, more well-equipped military and, you know, they were also more advanced. And so if they got into a gunfight with them, who knows what would have happened. And so, even though Imo is, like sitting here feeling very sore and very tired as he melts his snow, he was ultimately feeling kind of grateful that this reconnaissance mission had proven to be pretty low-key. However, just as the water began to boil, Imo and the other soldiers heard the unmistakable sound of machine gun fire coming from somewhere that had to be nearby. And so immediately, Imo and the others, they jump up, forget what they're doing, and they're looking to see where this gunfire is coming from. But then before they could even make sense of the situation, Imo's lieutenant yelled like, hey, get ready, get your guns. And so they all scooped up their weapons. Imo, he's picking his weapon up, and as he looks up, he looked off in the distance, maybe a quarter mile away, and he was shocked to see an entire pack of Soviet soldiers bearing down on them. They were literally skiing down this mountainside right nearby, and they were obviously shooting their machine guns, not in random directions, but right at Imo and the other men. They were clearly being attacked by these Soviets. Now, Imo and the other men have clearly been trained for this. This is literally why they're out here. They're soldiers. They're ready for this type of encounter. But for a moment, when Imo sees this overwhelming force that's descending on them, they're clearly outnumbered, like, this is gonna end badly. All Imo had in his head was just this overwhelming feeling of just terror. He was the oldest of 6 children, and when he first enlisted in the military, he had promised all of his little siblings that he wouldn't get hurt. He would come home, he would be okay. And now, he knew that wasn't gonna happen. Like he was gonna get killed. He just knew it. But Imo, after sort of breaking out of this initial thought, he looked over at his lieutenant, and his lieutenant looked terrified but he quickly composed himself, yelled for Imo, everybody else to flee. Just moments later, Imo and the other Finnish soldiers were on their skis, skiing as fast as they could away from the Soviets down the backside of this mountain, just doing anything they could to survive. And as Imo is skiing away, he can hear the sound of gunfire ricocheting off trees, zipping by his head. Like he's thinking at any point, I'm gonna get hit, or one of my teammates are gonna get hit. There's nothing we can do. We just gotta go as fast and as far as we can. And so he's skiing, and actually, Imo was at the front of their formation, so he's actually leading the pack. And so really it was his job to kind of create tracks in the snow that the others could follow in behind. It was easier for them, but it meant he was expending a lot of energy basically pushing all the snow down as he was making his escape. And as much as he wanted to maintain that position and do this for his teammates to continue to make tracks here, it was so exhausting. And also, like, when you're in combat, you have this unbelievable adrenaline rush that sometimes can lead to like a massive crash of energy. And it was like he had this huge rush of energy, and now it's like he's collapsing. Despite the need to escape here, it's like his body just cannot go any faster than he is going. And so before long, it's like he found himself slowing down and his teammates are zipping by him. Cause they can't stop, the bullets are flying fast. Like can't stop. Their only hope of survival is just to keep on going. And so I knows that, basically, if he can't keep up, he's dead. But his body, it was just, he couldn't go any faster. He was slowing down, he was going slower and slower. He can hear the sound of the gunfire getting closer and closer. And he's thinking about his siblings and how devastated they're going to be to find out that he was killed in this war. And so slower and slower he's going. The sounds are getting louder and louder behind him, and he sees the last of his teammates pass him. And he sees them just kind of drift off down the mountain into the white abyss beyond, and they're gone. He's alone and he just can't keep up. And then finally, he just loses control of his skis. He veers off to the side, he starts stumbling down the mountain, smashes into a tree, and he passes out. When Aimo woke up, it was light outside, but he had no idea how much time had passed. He also really had no idea how he was even still alive. Like, did the Soviets just decide not to kill me? Or did they not see me? Like, what happened to my teammates? Like, what's going on? He had a lot of questions. But in addition to feeling confused about the whole situation, he also had this really distinct other feeling. He had this immense sense of being alert. Like hyper alert, more than really, he had ever been in his whole life. It's like he could hear and see everything at like a 10 times level. It's like, oh my god, I know everything going on around me. I'm totally aware. So with his, like, hypervigilance that he suddenly was having sort of out of nowhere, he began to, take stock of the situation. Right away he, was able to see that he's alone, like, the Soviets are not nearby. He's not, like, being held captive. And again, his comrades are nowhere to be seen. So he's alone in the middle of the wilderness in the Arctic Circle. But he also could see that, okay, well, I still have my skis, so I can still get around. He still had his boots on, he still had his equipment on. Like he had the things he needed to survive. He even had his compass still, which had been in his hand, but he hadn't lost it. And so he had a way to navigate. And he had his weapon still. And so he's thinking, okay, like, the situation's bad, but I have what I need to survive for some time. And he also realized that, sort of amazingly, despite clearly crashing as a minimum and smashing into this tree that he was laying near, he didn't feel any pain in his body, and he didn't appear to have any injuries. So he's thinking, what a miracle here. That the worst thing that's happened here is I've basically been abandoned, I'm effectively lost, but it could be worse. And so Aimo, after, taking stock of his situation, he eventually stood up and he looked off into the distance. And he saw maybe 6 or 7 miles away, there was smoke up on this mountain off in the distance. And he immediately recognized that mountain was actually what appeared to be the rendezvous point for he and his squadron if they ever got separated. And so he's looking out at this mountain and then seeing, the signs of potential life over there, and he's thinking, oh my gosh, those are my teammates. That's where they've gone. They've gone to the rendezvous point. All I need to do is go to that mountain. So Aimo scooped up his backpack and picked up his gun and whatever other equipment he had on the ground, and then he started skiing towards this mountain. And for a while, he just kept on staring up at the smoke coming off the mountain, making sure he was going in the right direction. And as he got closer, he was nearly positive he could see that in addition to the smoke, he could see what appeared to be little lean to tents on the mountainside, which were telltale signs that those were Finnish soldiers. That's how they set up their tents. So he's thinking, this is it. Like, I'm gonna be safe. I just gotta get there. And he had so much energy, maybe because he was so close to being rescued or something, but he felt like this huge surge of energy. It was like nothing could make him tired. And then finally, Aimo got close enough to this campsite on the side of this mountain that he actually could see faces. He could see the other soldiers. And they were his, Finnish comrades. They had clearly gone to the rendezvous point and they hadn't seen him yet. And so he is, feeling like full of energy, barreling towards them, and he starts calling out to them. He's thinking they're gonna be, like, totally shocked that, anybody would just come out of the wilderness towards their campsite, let alone Aimo, who they must have assumed by this point was dead. Also, he's thinking, I don't want them to shoot at me thinking I'm a Soviet soldier, so I better get their attention. And so he's yelling out for his comrades. And at some point, one of the men, they turn and they see Aimo. And their reaction is not what Aimo wanted. Their reaction was being really shocked, grabbing their weapon and shooting at him. And before long, all these soldiers, all of his comrades, are opening fire on Aimo. And Aimo's like, come on. Like, I'm one of you. What are you doing? But he's already going so fast, skiing so fast, that his only move was to basically ski right down the middle of their camp and just go to the other side of the mountain. And so he literally skied through this campsite with all of his comrades shooting at him, who miraculously missed him, so he doesn't get shot somehow. The bullets are whistling past his head. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, they think I'm a Soviet. Come on, I'm calling out to you guys. I'm not a Soviet. But he barrels past them, and then after he's pretty far away from this campsite, he's yelling back to them like, guys, that's me. It's Aimo. What are you doing? But they're yelling and they're shooting in his direction. And so he had no choice but to just keep on skiing away from them, away from safety or what he believed was going to be safety. And so on he went for hours and hours, just skiing and skiing away from this ambush, if you will. And the whole time he's thinking like, what happened? Even if they shot at me at first, couldn't they have figured it out that like, I'm one of you? Like, wouldn't you have realized that eventually? As I skied right through your campsite, I have the same uniform as you. I have the same weapon as you. You recognize me. Like, what was that? And so he has no idea what happened. But he's like, how do I have so much energy? Like, how am I able to do this? I've been skiing for hours and hours and hours and hours. I've been shot at so many times. Like, this is surreal. What's happening? Like, what is going on here? And so Aimo just continued skiing for hours and hours until it was abundantly clear he was not in shooting range. He didn't hear the sound of any gunfire. Like, he's safe again. Still very confused why this was even happening, but he's safe. You know, the sun's gone down, and so he thinks like, okay, I need to stop. I need to make camp. I need to regroup. But it was at this point that he's thinking to himself, like, I haven't eaten anything. I haven't had any water. I've basically been at a full sprint. Like, skiing at a full sprint here for basically practically the whole day. I've had multiple near-death experiences. I smashed into a tree during that initial, skirmish. But I feel great. I feel like I have more energy than I've ever had in my whole life. And so he's just caught by, how am I able to do this? Is this what it's like when you're in a true survival situation? Like, your body just goes into, like, overdrive or something? Like he couldn't understand it. And so he's standing there like, basically telling himself, you really need to stop. Even though you have the energy to go pretty much indefinitely, you need to stop. You need to make a fire, you need to have food, you need to have water, you need to rest. But it was like he was forcing himself to do these things. He didn't feel compelled to do them. It was like, oh, that's right. I need to, do human stuff. And so, that's what he did. He stopped, he built a fire, he made some food, and he's not hungry at all. But he's eating the food, forcing himself to be He's having some water. And then he said, okay, I'll rest and then in the morning I'll figure out what to do next. But he lays down to go to sleep, and he should have been completely exhausted, but he wasn't. He couldn't even sleep. Not at all. He just laid there completely wide awake as the wind and sleet and snow whipped all around him. And he just laid there again. Feeling but just not tired at all. The next morning when the sun came up, Aimo had not slept at all, but still he was able to get up, put his skis on, and get his stuff and continue skiing, basically in the direction that he believed would bring him back to Finland. And as he was skiing, he's thinking to himself it's kind of interesting, because when he first got attacked by the Soviets, it was like his mind was clear but his body failed him. Like his legs got so tired from trying to cut those tracks in the snow that he fell off and then crashed, and that sort of led him to this position. But now, for whatever reason, it was like his mind was delirious, like he couldn't keep his thoughts straight, but his body was like a Terminator. Like he just kept on going no matter what or what. And so, he just kept on skiing almost like without even thinking. His body was like on autopilot. And so he skied for hours on hours just in this one direction that he sort of loosely believed would bring him back to Finland. And the whole time he's skiing, he didn't see another soul. He's out in the middle of, the Arctic Circle. There's no more Soviets. There's no more teammates. Nothing. He's just out in the middle of the wilderness. And realistically, he didn't know if he was even remotely going in the right direction, but he was just gonna go. But that night, as he's still just skiing in a straight line, not stopping, sort of unbelievably, he looked up ahead and he saw somebody, the first person he had seen since, the ambush at the campsite. And even more unbelievable is the person he saw was one of his teammates. It was this guy named Matty. He was a comrade of his. They had been together when the Soviets had first attacked. And so immediately I was thinking, clearly Matty got separated as well. And it's just serendipity that we have wound up at the same place. And so he skis right up to Matty, and he's waving him down. He's so relieved to see him. And Matty, when he looks over at Aimo, he doesn't shoot at him, but he sort of tells him too, be quiet, be quiet. Calm down, and he kind of beckons him over. And when Aimo comes up next to Matty, he has all these questions, what do? Where are we going? But Matty just tells him, just to be quiet, and then gestures to lay down on the ground. And so Aimo doesn't really know what's going on here, but he trusts Matty. Matty is not shooting at him. That was a good sign. And so the two of them just laid in the snow. They laid down right there, and for the first time in what felt like a very long time, Aimo was able to feel tired enough that when he closed his eyes, he did drift off to sleep almost right away. When Aimo woke back up again, he was not lying down in the snow with Matty. He was instead standing up on his skis, skiing down a mountain like on a mission. Matty's nowhere to be found. And on top of that, he didn't have his backpack and he didn't have his gun. Had no idea how long he'd been skiing for. He didn't know, where he was going. It was like he went from passed out to skiing, just magically skiing. Now, realistically at this point, Aimo was thinking to himself, clearly what's happening here is I'm, hallucinating or something. Because how is it possible that I was just with Matty, laying on the ground sleeping, and now I'm here? It didn't add up. And so as he's just sort of mindlessly skiing along, he's telling himself, this is you dying. This is you losing your mind before you die. Your mind is all over the place, your body is still going for reasons he didn't really understand. Still at, full tilt, full energy, didn't know why. But at some point that's gonna give out and you're just gonna die. That's what's gonna happen here. And so Aimo's only hope was that between now and when he died, that hopefully somebody would see him and save him. He knew it was an outside chance, but that's all he had. And so on he skied, no weapon, no backpack, no supplies. He's basically operating on no sleep and he's just skiing. And for days and days he doesn't stop. He can't believe his body is keeping up as well as it is. His mind is totally gone, but he is just going for days and days and days and days. Doesn't run into anyone. But then one day, again, days later, he's skiing along and magically, almost in front of him, appears this building. He can't tell if it's necessarily a military outpost or civilian. He doesn't know if it's Finnish or German or Soviet, but he knows even in his totally fractured mental state that attempting to go in that building and hoping there are people in there that will save him, even if they won't, even if they kill him, maybe that is a better outcome, a better choice than doing what he's doing right now, which is the sort of endless ski to his death. And so Imo starts skiing faster and faster towards this building, just like full reckless abandon. Fully committed to, this is my rescue, or this is my death. And as he gets closer, he sees, sort of unbelievably, that this is a military installation. And it is a German military installation. And remember, the Finnish are allied with the Germans at this point, and so this is a safe place for him. And so, he's so relieved. He can't believe he's going to potentially survive this thing. He takes off his skis and he starts running towards the front door of this building. But before he gets to the front door, he steps on something. And then there was a loud bang, and he's thrown into the air and comes crashing down. And when Imo opened his eyes and sort of took stock of what had happened, he didn't feel any pain. But he looked down and he saw his foot was just a bloody mess. There was literally bones poking out of his ankle. Like, he could see clearly he sustained a horrible injury, and he must have just stepped on a landmine. But Imo, determined to get into that building, he pulled himself up again, sort of channeling this unbelievable, just endurance he had been feeling the past several days that he had been out here all. He stood up and on one foot began hobbling his way towards this installation. And he finally gets to the front door of this German military base, and he grabs the doorknob and he's about to open it when there's another banging sound, and he's thrown again into the air. He had stepped on another landmine and he comes smashing down. And he doesn't die. He doesn't feel any pain. But he looks down at his legs and he sees his other leg that was not injured a minute ago is now also mangled. So now he can't even stand. He's incapacitated. And on top of that, even though he's near this military outpost, he turns and looks at it. And now that he's a little bit closer and he's sort of looking more, intentionally at this building, he realizes it's abandoned. Like, this isn't gonna save him. He's trapped. He's in the middle of nowhere and there's no one here on. And so at this point, Imo just said, you know what just said? It's over. Like, I'm gonna die. And so he literally just crawled his way over to this nearby ditch, let himself roll into it, and he just waited to die. He just knew it was over, but he didn't die for days. He just laid in this ditch, like, unable to die. He wanted to die. He wanted this to be over. Like, what else is he gonna do? Who's gonna save him? But he just watched the sun come up and set, go up, set, over and over and over and over. He lost track of how many days he was just laying there. Again, bleeding profusely, like, grievously injured. He hasn't eaten anything. He hasn't had any water. Like, he can't believe he's still alive. He really can't believe it. And then as he's laying there, one of these days he's just in this ditch. He looks up during the daytime and he sees what looks like a plane flying overhead. Now at this point, Imo is in very bad shape. I mean, he's alive, but it's not going well, and he knows that, So he doesn't know if he's hallucinating this or what, but he felt like it was real. But after watching this plane circle overhead for a minute, Imo was certain he heard the sound of this plane landing nearby. And then a couple of minutes later, he could have sworn from the ditch. He can't really see anything. He could hear the sound of people speaking in Finnish, his native language. Again, he didn't know if he was hallucinating or not, but he sees this head poke over the top of the ditch. And it was this young man, this young Finnish guy, and he's looking down at Imo, and Imo's looking back up at him. And then a second later, Imo was being pulled out of the ditch. Later that day, Imo found himself laying in a hospital bed inside of a hospital in Finland. Like, the man in the plane, all that, not a hallucination. He really had been rescued. And once he was at the hospital, it turned out he weighed just 94 pounds. He was also badly burned and frostbitten, and both of his legs were very badly mutilated and mangled. And his heart was beating at a staggering 200 beats per minute, despite the fact he's just laying in bed not doing anything. And even more crazy was, they couldn't actually get his heart to slow down. It just kept beating at this crazy high level. Now at first, doctors and nurses and all the staff were, really shocked by Imo's condition. Not really just that he had survived, but again, his heart rate. Like, it just seemed like, dude, how are you alive right now? Like, your heart can't beat at this level for this long without eventually killing you. But after they spoke to Aimo and had him recount the whole ordeal of him being out, getting shot at and lost in the whole thing, they learned one really specific thing that explained the whole thing. When Aimo and his, Finnish comrades were initially ambushed by the Soviet soldiers, they decided to flee. But Aimo, he was having such a hard time physically keeping up with the other soldiers. Like, he was just getting so tired from trying to break the tracks, and then he fell off and he's thinking to himself, if I don't find a way to keep up, I'm gonna get captured or get killed by the Soviets. And so he's desperate. And so, before he ultimately crashed down the side of the mountain from exhaustion, he tried something to try to give himself some energy to try to make this escape. He pulled out these special military rations that he had been issued, along with everybody else in his squadron. They were all given these rations. And the reason you take these rations is to give yourself some energy. And so, he takes these rations and he's thinking, this is gonna do it. This is gonna give me the boost I need to get out of here and make the escape with my teammates. But the rations didn't work, and so he did sort of completely fall off. He was so tired to the point where he literally tumbled down the side of the mountain. His teammates, they skied off, and he smashed into a tree and he passes out. However, when Aimo woke up, he was amazed he had not been captured or killed by the Soviets. But he's realizing he's all alone, and what's gonna happen to me? And then he starts to feel like, man, I just have a lot of energy. I can see and perceive things on a level that I couldn't before. Well, that's because the military rations had kicked in, and now he had this abundance of energy. And it allowed him to basically ski indefinitely without sleeping, without having water, without food. He gets blown up twice. His feet have been blown off, basically. He's laying in a ditch dying, but he just can't seem to die. I mean, the guy should have died several times, but these rations did their job. They gave him all the energy he needed to survive this crazy 2 weeks in the wild. Well, the military rations, they're called Pervitin. And this drug, I don't know if it's still given to soldiers now, but probably not, because effectively what Pervitin is just pure crystal meth. And so in essence, Aimo survived in the wild for all this time because he was on just a pure, meth-fueled rage. He was just completely high for 2 weeks, and it saved his life. One thing to note about Pervitin is it does have two distinct downsides. 1, it is incredibly addictive, and 2, it creates really intense hallucinations. And so very likely, he did not come across his own battalion who then opened fire on him. He did not come across Matty, his teammate out in the wild who told him to lay down. And who knows, I'm not even sure if the military installation he saw was real. Very likely all of that was just in his mind. However, the landmines, those were real. Somewhat unbelievably, Aimo would make a full recovery and he would go on to get married. He would have 9 children, and he would live to the age of 71. And as grateful as he was to the drug that did save his life, he never took Pervitin again. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. Alright, until next time. See ya! There is a house in Gary, Indiana that has been dubbed the Demon House. Now, if you were to walk past this house on the street, it wouldn't stand out to you. It's a very modest, single-story, 3-bedroom home. Looks like all the other houses around it. But the history behind this house is totally bizarre. Latoya Ammons, who was a mother of 3 that lived inside of this house with her 3 kids, she began to report to the police that demons were throwing her children against the wall. Now, when police got the report that children are being thrown against the wall, their first thought is, you're an unfit parent. And so they sent Child Protective Services and the police to go check out this residence and make sure that she really was a competent parent. They are shocked at what they find. What they find is documented in a police report and courtesy of the executive producer of 317 films, Christopher Gay too. I have a copy of said police report. And when I read through this thing for the first time, I literally wrote him an email and said, "This is fake. There's no way this is an actual police report." And he said, "No, that's real. It's from the Lake County Sheriff's Department. It is the official police report. And it's mind-blowing." Today, I'm going to tell the story of what happened when the police got involved. And I'm just going to use information that was in the police report. But before we get into today's crazy story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all I do. And I upload 3 to 4, even 5 times every week. And so if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to gently take the like button out for a nice seafood dinner and never call it again. That's so weird. And also, sub to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into the story. After numerous reports that Latoya Ammons was mistreating her children, based on reports that she gave, she was telling police that demons were throwing her kids around the house. Based on those reports, Child Protective Services was sent to do a home study. To go to their house, go to Latoya Ammons' house, and make sure it was a safe, clean place for children to be living. In addition to the case manager, her name was Valerie Washington, who was going to be going over to do this home study. The Lake County Sheriff's Department also sent over Lieutenant Grushka, who would be assisting Valerie in watching the home study take place. When Grushka arrives at the house, he is met with Valerie Washington, also Latoya Ammons, the mother, and her 2 sons, Andrew, who's 9, and Amonte, who's 7, as well as Latoya's mother, so the boy's grandmother. Her name was Rosa Washington. The case manager pulls Grushka aside, out of earshot of Latoya and her family, and she starts telling Grushka about what happened at the hospital 8 days earlier. Because she, the case manager, had already begun investigating Latoya Ammons and that whole situation with her kids. 8 days earlier, Washington was at the hospital sitting in a waiting room. Washington was with a psychologist, and they were speaking to Rosa, who was the grandmother of these children. In the room was also Andrew, the oldest son, and Amonte, the youngest son. And as they're chatting, Amonte, the youngest son, stands up and walks to the middle of the waiting room, and his eyes roll back into his skull. And he begins emitting this growling sound that sounded too deep for a boy of 7 years old. The grandmother reacted to it like she had seen it before. She got right up, she marched over to him, and she took him by the hands and she yelled, "You are not you are not you." And she kept saying that. And the boy's eyes are still back in his head and he's not responding to anything his grandmother's saying. As Rosa is repeating over and over again, "You are not you," Amonte begins backpedaling towards a wall behind him. And Rosa holds his hands the whole time. She's holding his hands firmly. He gets to the wall and, instead of stopping, he puts his foot up against the wall. This is a 7-year-old boy, and begins walking up the wall by pressing against Rosa. And she's holding on tight, and he's pressing back at her and using that weight to walk backwards up the wall. The psychologist and Washington are just watching in disbelief. Rosa's holding on to him as he walks all the way up to where he's on his tippy toes on the wall. And then he flips forward in front of her and lands on his feet on the other side of Rosa. The psychologist and Washington literally run out of the room, and they go get a doctor and they explain what happened. The doctor comes in, not having any clue what to make of this, and just says to the boy, "Can you do that again?" And Dalmonte, at this point, his eyes are back to normal and he's sitting down next to Rosa, and he says, "What? I didn't do anything," and acted like he had not been walking up the walls. Now, it's not in the report how Lieutenant Grushka responds to Washington's story about the hospital. However, the entire police report that I'm pulling all this information from is written by Lieutenant Grushka at the end of the investigation. So this exchange between he and the case manager, Washington, about the hospital visit that he was not part of, apparently carried weight in the entire investigation that he felt compelled to add it into the report. Even though on paper, you would think if you're doing a home study for this house, Why would you incorporate something that didn't have anything to do with the house? It gives you maybe an insight into Lieutenant Grushka. Although his language remains super professional and very pragmatic, that perhaps Lieutenant Grushka, at the end of this investigation, was starting to think this might be paranormal. After this story, two more police officers show up to the house to assist with this home study. One was Brian Miller and the other was Charles Austin. At this point, the three officers, Grushka, Miller, and Austin, along with the case manager Washington, begin walking towards the family and towards the front door of the house. LaToya says that she and her kids will not go back in the house because they had moved out very recently because of the strangeness that they claim was happening inside of the house. They felt like they were under attack by demons. And so the police, they needed someone to bring them in, and so Rosa, the grandmother, LaToya's mother, she offered to go in with them. So the house is a single-story, 3-bedroom house. You walk in under inside of the screened-in porch. You go into the main level. There's a few bedrooms, and then there's a stairwell that leads down into the basement. And so they go in, and Lieutenant Grushka is in charge of taking pictures and recording audio the whole time they're in the house time. They were not aware that they had already moved out, so it's a bit of an awkward home study because they're not even living there anymore. But either way, they're gonna do their job. They're walking around taking pictures of each of the bedrooms. There's 3 bedrooms, there's a kitchens, basic stuff upstairs, and then they go downstairs to the basement. Now, the basement was where LaToya and her family claimed the majority of the paranormal activity was taking place. The steps leading down to the basement were wood. They went down into the basement. The basement floor was concrete and the walls were concrete blocks. As they go down, Lieutenant Grushka would notice that there were candles that had been placed all over the basement floor that had burned down to their wick. There was also an altar and a nativity scene that had been placed near the underside of the stairs. And so when Grushka goes over to take pictures of the altar and the nativity scene, he recognizes that under the stairs, near where those 2 things are placed, it's all dirt. The concrete that made up the floor of the basement had been broken away, and there was jagged pieces of concrete where there should have been a continuous flow of concrete underneath the steps. It had been snapped up and broken away. It was gone. When Rosa was questioned about the strangeness of the basement with all the candles in the altar, she just said that there's a presence down here, and that's all she was able to articulate. The other officers and the case manager and Rosa, they go back upstairs, and Lieutenant Grushka and Charles Austin, the other officer, they stay in the basement and take a few extra pictures. A couple more underneath the stairs and just to the candles before they ultimately go upstairs as well. When Grushka comes upstairs, Rosa's waiting for him, and she's about to turn the light off leading down into the basement, and she asks him, "Did you get any pictures underneath the stairs?" And he said, Yeah, I did. I stayed down there. I took some more pictures." She looks at him and she says, "Sometimes at night when we're sleeping on the main floor, we'll hear commotion in the basement. It sounds like maybe someone bumping on the underside of the stairs, and then you hear footsteps walking up the wood steps, and whatever it is stops on the other side of the door leading into the main floor, and it will stay there for hours. We're too scared to open the door to look." Grushka goes back to his office and he immediately uploads the pictures that he took with a focus on the ones he took in the basement. And he finds that there's a couple pictures he took under the stairs that, in the right-hand corner of the picture, just behind one of the steps, it's partially obscured, is a white mist or a white cloud. And he zooms in on it, and he brings other officers and they look at it. And if you zoom in close enough, it looks like a man's face. As they're zoomed in on this mist underneath the stairs, they can see, only because they've zoomed in, that there appears to be a faint green mist on the left side of the picture. Appears to be a woman's face. Grushka and Austin, who were the only 2 in the basement at the time of these pictures taken, swear they did not see a white or green mist under the stairs when they took pictures. Grushka, again, it doesn't say in the report how he's feeling, but you can imagine he's starting to feel a little bit uneasy about what he's witnessing. Grushka just goes to his audio recording, and so he fast forwards to the section where he and Austin are alone in the basement taking these additional photos. And you can clearly hear on the recording Grushka and Austin talking to each other as they're taking these pictures. And at some point, as they're taking these pictures of the basement, a third voice, not Austin, not Grushka, says directly into the audio recorder, "Hey." The audio recorder was one that Grushka was used to using, and it had never malfunctioned before. And he and Austin were the only ones down there, and so they couldn't explain where the third voice was coming from. And neither could any of the other officers who listened to it. On April 30th, Grushka set up a meeting with Latoya Ammon's priest, who she was very close with. They were regular churchgoers. This priest, his name was Father Maginot. He had been at the Ammons' residence 5 days before this home visit was done, when Latoya Ammons and her family were still living in that residence. And so Grushka went to interview him to get a sense of what it was like when they were still living there. Father Maginot said he was there because Latoya had reached out and said, "I don't know what to do, cause she's claiming there are demons here, are demons. And while they're sitting in the living room on the main floor, Father Maginot was telling Grushka that the bathroom lights started flickering on and off. And so it was distracting enough that, ultimately, Father Maginot got up and walked over to the bathroom. And as soon as he went inside, the flickering stopped. And then he'd go back down and sit down, and it would start again. Repeatedly, Father Maginot would get up when it was flickering. He would go in and it would stop. He'd come back and it would start flickering again. So while this is happening and Father Maginot is going back and forth to the bathroom trying to figure out why the light is flickering, Latoya points out that a liquid is forming on one of the window blinds in the room that they were all sitting in. There was this oily liquid substance that was just kind of trickling down the window blinds. And Father Maginot walks over and looks at it. They're all looking at it, and there's no leak in the ceiling. There's no source for this liquid, and it hadn't been there before. At least that's what Latoya Ammons and her family is saying. That's not from us. We don't know what that is. As they're looking at this oily substance on the blinds, the cord that controls the blind itself starts swaying back and forth, and everyone's startled as they're looking at it because there's no draft in the room. The window's not open. There's no reason it should be swaying. While they're looking at this cord, Father Maginot looks down and sees this huge footprint in the carpet near where they're standing. That was too big to be his. And nobody else in the house had a footprint that was that big. At this point, Father Maginot doesn't think it's safe for the family to be there and advises her to leave. And this would actually be the episode that prompts Latoya Ammons and her family to leave the house and not come back. On May 10th, Lieutenant Grushka, a new Child Protective Services case manager, and a host of police officers go back to the Ammons' residence. The Ammons' residence has been unoccupied with all utilities shut off, locked and sealed since the last time they were there, which was on April 27th. So it's a 2-week period that no one has been in the house. But there was a customary follow-up to this house. They had to, as part of the home study. When Lieutenant Grushka arrives at the property, outside is Father Maginot, as well as Latoya Ammons, her mother Rosa, Latoya's two sons, Andrew and Damonte, as well as a host of police officers. There's a canine unit that's there all. Although it's not said explicitly in the report, it would appear that the reason there's all this additional police presence in the canine unit is because there's enough weirdness being reported about the house. There could be, a home invasion situation happening, that somebody else is living in this house. Any number of things could be happening, but they can't write off all of the strange testimony about what's happening in the house. And so, before they go in for the second home study, they have one of the dogs from the canine unit go into the property and search the property for intruders, just in case this was a home invasion or something like that. They wanted to just check the box, so they send the dog in. The dog comes out, hasn't found anything unusual. And so the police, along with Father Maginot, the case manager, and Rosa, they go back into the house. The main level looked untouched. There was nothing strange happening in the main level when they walked around. Nothing was disturbed. It looked like no one had been here in 2 weeks. So they open the door to the basement, they turn on the light, and a couple weird things happen right away. One, they notice that on the wooden steps leading into the basement, there's an oily substance with no clear origin that goes all the way down. Steps, snakes around the side, and disappears underneath the stairs. As they begin walking down the stairs, the case manager from Child Protective Services happens to touch a cabinet that had been built into the walls along the stairwell leading down into the basement. And immediately she pulls her hand back, she grabs her pinky, and she reacts like something had hurt her. And they asked, "Hey, what's going on?" And she's like, "I don't know. I just touched the cabinet and my hand now hurts. My pinky hurts. It's tingling." And it apparently had turned white. We don't have any images to show that, but her pinky basically had been wounded just from touching this cabinet. And so the officers go down into the basement. They follow this oily trail that goes back under the stairs, and they're thinking to themselves, all the utilities have been turned off. There's no reason there should be any water down here, not to mention there's no origin for this oily substance. And no one's been in the house for the past 2 weeks, so we can't even account for this by saying that one of the family members might have spilled something. And so, even though it's not written into the report that they were scared or that they were considering this could be beyond rational explanation, it's clear from what happens next that everybody there was ready to explore the idea that something was happening underneath the steps. Because now, the families claimed there's been something crawling out of their end walking up the stairs at night. You have the strange, oily substance coming from the underside of the stairs. You have the white and the green apparition inside of the pictures. Father Maginot suggested that if there was some sort of demonic possession happening in the house, that there's a good chance they would find things underneath the steps that were tied to the family. And so they decide they're gonna dig up the dirt underneath the steps. And so Grushka begins digging into this dirt patch under the steps, and he makes it about 2 feet down. And he finds a press on pink fingernail. He also finds women's underwear, and as he keeps digging, he finds a political pin, like for your t-shirt. He also finds the lid to one of the cooking pots from upstairs. He continues to dig and he finds some trash and miscellaneous papers. And it dawns on the group that someone or something is leaving the basement, going into the main section of the house, taking things from the family, going back downstairs, going underneath the steps, and burying them, and probably has been for some time. And so at some point, they stopped being able to dig any farther. The soil was too hard. So they put the soil back and decide to leave the house. As they're leaving the house, Rosa is the last one to leave, and she actually says, "Hey, come over here." And she's standing in that screened-in porch and she's looking up at the window blinds. On the window blinds in the house is that same, or it appeared to be the same, oily substance trickling down the blinds. That matched the description of what Father Maginot had said he had seen when he was visiting the family before and saw liquid coming down the blinds. And so the officers reacted to this by saying, "Rosa, did you do this? Are you responsible for putting this liquid on the blinds?" And she said, "No. There was no clear source for this liquid. There was no leak. There was nothing." And so Lieutenant Grushka wipes the liquid off of the blinds and tells everyone to leave the house. For 25 minutes they waited, and then they went back inside to see if there was going to be liquid there. And there was a. Then Father Maginot would say that after that first time, he was there and he saw the liquid dripping down. He did some research, and it's very common over the history of time that if there's any sort of demonic possession in a house, that liquids will ooze from different areas in the house. And it's this oily substance that matches the description of what they just saw. At this point, Lieutenant Grushka and the police tell everyone to vacate the premises. They lock it up and they leave. That is the end of the police report. Although not included in this police report, where I pulled all of the story from, Charles Austin, who was the other officer who was in the basement with Lieutenant Grushka when they were taking pictures underneath the steps, and they heard the steps and they heard that voice on the recorder. Well, Charles Austin actually worked for another police department, the Hammond Police Department. And he took some pictures of the outside of this house during the time that no one was staying at the house. And one of the official police pictures shows a shadowy figure standing in the screened-in porch of this house, right near where that liquid was dripping down the blinds. In 2014, Zach Bagans, who's a popular paranormal investigator, he hosts the show Ghost Adventures. He purchased the Demon House and filmed a documentary that he called The Demon House, and you can check that out for yourself. And he demolished the house in 2016. So I'd love to get your opinion on this story. because I told it based on information that was available in official police documentation. Now, that doesn't mean that it was paranormal, that this house was haunted, that there were demons there, but it at least makes you wonder what was really happening in that house. If you enjoyed this story, then please, if you would, kindly take the like button out for a nice seafood dinner and then never call it again. And then subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3 to 4, even 5 video uploads that sound an awful lot like what you just heard. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube, or some combination of those, I'm just very thankful for your support. And until next time, see you guys.